what the girl does to the boy, if you can get around to it.
The things that I like seem to be so different. I don't know, they're not the things that everybody likes.
Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries, brought to you by Treble Media, treblezine.com. Great music writing. As you're listening to this, it's probably 2025, and who knows what the world looks like. But they did a wrap up of their best albums of 2024, favorite albums of 2024. So we will link to that because you know what, stuff that came out in 2024. Maybe you didn't listen to every album. I know I listened to every album, every single song that was released by anybody in the world in 2024. So I'm up on music. You fools might not have, so you might want to check that out. Anyway, Treble Zine, they're great. Thanks for sponsoring us or bringing us to you. I'm David Lizabram. I'm here with my co-host
Andrew Keats,
and we are joined by Matty Monroe, who's I know from he owns Reddit. No, he's
oh god, I wish
Indieheads.
If I owned Reddit, my apartment would be way nicer. I'll tell you that much.
The Indieheads subreddit, the podcast, the Indie Empire. You're the master of all things indie. Is that fair to say, Matty?
Yes, I would say that I'm the titular indie head of the various indie heads, subreddit, podcast, whatever else. Anytime that Spotify uses a hashtag indie heads when they're recommending stuff to you, I get a cut of that. So I get about 10 cents a year from that. It's really cool.
Okay, well, you don't have to brag. We just barely got started. But, so we connected, believe it or not, I think we connected over Blue Sky, which now I know canonically Elon Musk listens to our podcast, of course, as all the movers and shakers of the world. The Department of Government Efficiency, they all listen to us. And so I hope I just didn't make them mad. But we're just so people know. If you want to talk Rock Docs with us, we are at Rock Docs Podcast, not just on X, the Everything app, but also on Blue Sky. And you can reach out to us directly, and then you may end up being on our podcast. So let's see how it goes, Matty. All right. So we typically...
Off to a ripping start, just based on the selection that Matty made for us here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that. So we, when we're feeling generous, we allow our guests to select the film they want to discuss. And you chose Wild Combination, A Portrait of Arthur Russell, which is a 2008 documentary about the musician Arthur Russell, directed by Matt Wolf. Arthur Russell was a songwriter, a singer, a composer, a cellist, a sort of pioneer. We'll get into a lot about Arthur Russell tonight. So, Matty, let's start with you. Before we get into the film, when did you first become familiar with the works of Arthur Russell?
I want to say I discovered Arthur's works in like 2015 for sure. A member of the Indieheads podcast, one of our good friends, Ian King, was a very good, very big fan of Arthur Russell and put me onto his works in the old school Indieheads podcast chat, which was like a Skype room before like Discord really took off. And so like, I think Ian showed me or was like, hey, go listen to World of Echo and Calling Out of Context, and just immediately was just smitten. And like, I had not heard anything like this before. It was just so immediately unique and immediately gripping. And, thankfully, there's just so much out there now, which is crazy considering the fact that so much of his work, not to spoil going into the documentary, but so much of his work would go unreleased until after his passing. So like the fact that I was able to dive in when I dove in and just having so much out there. And even then there was still more that got released after I got into him. So immediately fell in love, dove into the back catalog, just whatever I could find, any music, anyone talking about him. Just I was completely enamored, just by his music and by his story, of this recluse that was just seemingly so ahead of his time in many ways.
Yeah, somebody in this documentary says not necessarily ahead of his time, just out of time. Like he was neither early nor late nor like parallel to anything. He just did his own thing. And I actually was trying to bat back and forth in my head like what I agree with, because there is so much of what he does that is reminiscent of stuff that has happened in the decades after him. But he also, it's not like a sounds like similarity. He really just has such a unique perspective. Like the way he sings, the lyrical approach is so unique, and then paired with the like echo filled sound is just it really is a wild combination.
Hey,
Whoa.
Andy, when did you?
Movie.
There you go, Andy. Were you like on to Arthur Russell before this, or this is a new thing for you?
No, totally new. I hadn't listened to him at all until watching the movie, and I guess we often say we often end these shows by saying like, or as part of a review, say like, would this be a good way to turn someone on to a band or musician? And like, we don't even have to speculate here. That's what happened in this case. I didn't know this musician, and I have been listening to nothing else since we started watching this movie. I watched it a few times, and his music is fantastic. We can go on and on about it after this, but this is a very cool movie, and his music is both like really approachable, like immediately approachable is one thing about it. And then also it has the fact of like, there's like an impossible amount of it. Like its volume is so huge. like you can't, it's like deciding to start liking the Grateful Dead or something, where you're just like, well, this will be a project for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Which 25 Guided by Voices album should I start with?
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I'm kind of in between, where like I don't remember where I first heard about Arthur Russell, but he's like kind of a name that I've known for a while. I've listened to a bunch of his stuff over the years, but I never, for whatever reason, went deep, just because like there's only so many hours in the day, and as previously mentioned, I listen to all new recordings that are released in the world. Like whenever I've like been reminded to or come across or whatever an Arthur Russell song, there's never been one that I didn't like. There's good. Like they're all good. And so like I think once in a while a new compilation will come out or something, and I'll check that. I'll be like, this is great, I should listen to this all the time. And so hopefully this movie will remind me to do that. So I guess I'm sort of in between here. So Matty, when did you first see the movie?
Funny enough, I've been putting off seeing this movie for a very long time, and you inviting me onto the podcast was finally the push I needed to finally watch this documentary.
Love it.
I think for many years it just wasn't on streaming. You had to like rent it, and just it was hard to find. And then thankfully, when you asked, the greatest streaming service in the world, Tubi, has this movie. So thank God for Tubi. Tubi, I mean, it's the only streaming service where you can watch Wild Combination and Hundreds of Beavers. It's a beautiful streaming service. So
to be honest, honestly, if they wanted to rebrand themselves like the home of rock docs, they could do that without any criticism from me.
A good way for them to do that would be to sponsor our podcast.
Yeah, if they want to sponsor our podcast, they have
Tubi. We know that Elon Musk is listening, but also Tubi also listening. So
they're running laps around the Netflixes of the world when it comes to the rock docs game.
Yeah, Tubi. Shout out.
I will say my friends and I on the Indieheads podcast, we have a running bit about that there should be a Tubi original podcast, and we have two perfect candidates. If you're very familiar with your online guys, imagined Mind of Jason and Lights Camera Jackson doing a movie podcast together. If you know those names, then you're like, wow, I want to hear that. And if you don't know those names, don't just it's a deep dark rabbit hole. You don't want to get into it, but if you're already there like me, we're gonna make it happen one day, and I gotta work my way up the Tubi corporate ladder to make it happen.
So this movie, none of us had seen this movie before, like we started prepping for the podcast, but we don't have to do this if we're doing a podcast, an episode. If the documentary we're discussing is like about Elvis or something, but I do want to kind of set the scene here. So this is what I knew about Arthur Russell, like off the top of my head before I saw the movie. Like he recorded a whole bunch of music in a variety of genres. He played cello. That's like the instrument he was most known for. He had this very idiosyncratic vocal style. I sort of almost, it's like almost like a croon, almost like in a weird way, like Chet Baker or something,
Yes.
where it's not like he has like a huge range, but it's very evocative. There's not like a lot of vibrato, although he puts a lot of echo on it. And anyway, it's sort of very mysterious. And I mean, I knew that he collaborated with a bunch of people like Talking Heads, and I knew that he had done dance music and, you know, classical type art music and variety of different things. And I knew that he lived in New York, and I knew that he died of AIDS. That's basically what I knew, you know, in the late 80s. So that was like the scope of it. And honestly, like the last part of that is maybe the reason why I hadn't seen the movie, like, or gone out of the way to see it. Cause I was like, well, this sounds like it's going to end as a bummer, you know? And, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. And, the movie handles everything so well. I don't imagine any of us are going to trash this movie, so we can just, you know, get right into that. But I mean, that's basically the sketch of a biography that I knew, and the movie really fills out kind of where he came from. And you know, this is like very much like Andy said, a little bit of an intro type of movie, like where it's telling you the whole story. It's not like the type of thing where it's like, this is 1 week in his life, or this is about one album or whatever. It's like really a biography, you know, from his childhood through his life, and then to some extent about the life of the people around him and his music after he died. I just want to, like, I don't know, man. We talk about so many of these music documentaries, and like, I just want to say I've got a lot of respect for somebody who's like, in 2008, I'm going to like figure out a way to make a movie about Arthur Russell, because I mean, even fewer people knew him then than now. And it's not like he's like, you know, the streaming services are demanding Arthur Russell content. You know what I mean? And so just the fact that this exists and is so well done is, you know, I mean, it's a phenomenal thing. So I just want to start there. So
yeah, I would say a couple things. One, in the movie says a portrait, and I do think that is a good word selection. It's a portrait, partially because there's actually not much of like Arthur discussing Arthur in it, or even Arthur being Arthur in it. Like, there's very little footage of him. There's very little you know, either of him performing or just being out in the world. Like, we often remark upon, like, isn't it crazy that some of these musicians had a camera on them so much pre-fame that there's even the sort of material to do these, you know, sort of nose to tail films about somebody. This is not like that. They really don't have a lot of stuff to work with here. So in lieu of that, we get all the people from his life talking about him, and we get you know, photographs, and we get photographs of the time of where he was, but not necessarily with him in them. And we get, you know, sort of Arthur in the words of the people in his life, most of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we hardly ever hear his speaking voice at all. He barely gave any interviews because he just was a relatively obscure figure for the most of the time. I mean, maybe there was letters and things like that, but, you know, they weren't really used very much for the film. So there's not a lot of him speaking, or even like somebody narrating his words or anything like that. It's all trying to understand this person from the outside is kind of the perspective we're taking.
Yeah. It's important to remember that, like, for Arthur, his main expression, pretty much since his, you know, for his entire adult life, was music. Like, that's the way that he expressed himself. That's the way he communicated. There's a great bit a bit later on in the documentary about how, you know, essentially Arthur making music, especially, you know, when he is living with his partner, like, the music kind of becomes a diary, you know, like, hey, while you're off at work, here's what I was up to today. And it's, you know, it is so fascinating. And I was going to mention because there's so little footage of him, one of the kind of ways they get around in the documentary is that they do have an actor playing Arthur for some segments. When I was checking the Letterboxd reviews, it's a point of contention, but I you know, as someone that grew up watching TV documentaries with tons of horrible
Right.
reenactments, it's like, that's fine. I'm not.
Yeah.
You can't really be mad about this. Like, at the end of the day, like, this movie has the blessing of his estate, so like, it's a very minor infraction that I and the fact that they actually used a period appropriate like equipment that's enough for me. Like, all right, I approve. You use the right camera, thank God, because so many of these documentaries just use, like, when they try doing like, oh, like, here is it's fucking like 8mm film that's so clearly filmed on digital and horrible post effects.
Yeah.
Listeners, I'm a mass communications major, like, where I majored in like video production, so that shit really bothers me so much.
I hate
when I
that.
see it happen. It's
Yeah,
so bad. So this is like A-okay to me.
Yeah, if you're going to try to do that, you have to nail it and make it seamless. And I did not realize until I was reading about the movie afterwards that some of the scenes of him walking around New York or whatever were, you know, reenacted. So it's done so seamlessly. And I mean, partially maybe it's because this movie comes out in 2008. And so, like, I mean, I watched it, like, you know, streaming, and it's, you know, I think it said it was HD, but, you know, like, it looks kind of grainier than like something that was filmed in 4K today. So in some way it's a little bit easier to get away with period recreation because the period was closer. Yeah. And you know what I mean? Like, things that are made with professional equipment today, like, it shows every flaw. So that makes it really hard. Maybe even harder to do that. But anyway, that's really getting into the weeds of Rock Dogs, which is what we love to do. So yeah,
well, yeah, and we should at this moment, I think, maybe discuss the director of this film, who is a pretty interesting, real deal guy. This is a serious documentary maker, Matt Wolf. So, you know, some of his recent films include this pretty incredible looking movie just based on the trailer, Teenage. I don't know if anybody saw that, from 2013, sort of about the birth of youth culture, but it attacks the question of the creation of youth culture by pursuing the time before the 50s, like before there was anything just like noticeable of what we now call like teen culture or youth culture.
Right. So it's like going against the, like, James Dean invented being a teenager kind of trope.
Yeah, it's like,
okay, interesting.
And that Spaceship Earth, about like sort of these people who lived in a biodome for 2 years. Recorder, the Marion Stokes project, about the woman who recorded 840,000 hours of TV. So
yeah, that looks like, so cool.
Like, he is choosing serious topics and he is going about them in a serious way. This is not your streamer IP management version of a rock doc,
right? Absolutely.
Despite having the blessing of the estate.
Yeah. So let's kind of roll through this. I mean, because we don't have to go totally sequentially, but, you know, it starts with his life. Arthur grows up in the 50s and 60s in Iowa, in a small town. Early in the movie, we get the appearance of, everybody who shows up in this movie is great. And there's no villains in this movie, really, but two people that you just come to, like, really connect with. His parents, Chuck and Emily. They're interviewed and speak on camera. And, they just really strike you as salt of the earth type people. You know, Chuck, as I understand, served in World War II, and then I think they said is he sells insurance to farmers or something like that. You know what I mean? Like a very Midwestern farm country kind of guy. And, you know, they say that they were sort of experimental for their time. They don't really elaborate on that, but it seems like, you know, art and music were part of their lives.
She said she played cello. Right.
She played cello. So, you know, there's like a little bit of a amusing story about how he, like, you know, came to play the cello because, you know, but anyway, so when they talk about him, this is what we learn about young Arthur Russell. He didn't play marbles. So if you came to this looking for a guy who played marbles, you're not getting it.
Not Arthur.
I'm out.
Not Arthur.
I'm out.
He didn't play. Kids made fun of him. You know, he put on magic shows. He just, you know, was like kind of a little bit seems like a little bit of a square peg for Oskaloosa.
There's something the thing that like makes me understand who these parents are more than anything is that they just like forthrightly point out that he had really bad acne, which can be so hard for teenagers.
Yeah.
It's like such a specific type of parent who's just like, yeah, he had terrible acne, you know, like totally willing to just like identify the flaw and be like, yeah, it was hard to get through life with all that acne.
Yeah, but they say it's hard for teenagers in a sympathetic way also.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
like, but it's very sort of like it's
like an old timey wisdom to it.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. They but you know, they talk about how, you know, it's the 60s. They didn't come from obviously drug culture. He gets into pot and then, you know, basically he runs off to San Francisco, and that's kind of where the adventures begin. And I mean, Matty, I'll let you jump in, but I just want to say, if you're going to be, you know, kind of an awkward, artsy kid, and it's time for you to hit the road and find yourself, having it be 1967, you can go to San Francisco. You've picked a good time to do that. You know what I mean? Like that's you kind of nailed it, bro.
I mean, again, the timing could not be better. It's like, all right, I'm, you know, they caught me smoking weed, and I'm, you know, I feel like I'm out of place. Hey, you know where those things are wildly accepted? San Francisco. Let's hit the road and let's go. Let's run away from my home in Iowa and my parents that loving but maybe not understanding. You know, and as someone that is prone to be deeply embarrassed, I got a eternal respect for Arthur Russell being like, oh God, I'm eternally embarrassed, and just running to San Francisco because his parents mentioned like, yeah, you know, like he probably thought his parents are going to report him to the cops for smoking weed, and he's like, nope, I'm going to go be a fugitive of the state. But of course he doesn't get in trouble because, you know, his parents are cool. So
yeah, you could just move to San Francisco and show up. It's 1967 and be like, yo, I play the cello. What's up, everybody?
Well, and it's just like, and so then once he ends up in San Francisco, it's sort of impossible not to like wonder what possible musical happenstances he ran into or narrowly avoided that go unremarked upon in this movie. You know,
very much so,
right? Like, I mean, he's there's like a little gap. They talk about he runs away in 67. I think the next person we talk to who like meets him in San Francisco says that happens in like 1970. So it's not exactly clear like which day he arrives, but like he's in San Francisco in like the moment where all of that stuff is happening, basically.
Yeah. This movie alludes to a lot of potential crossovers with people that we've you know, talked about a lot on the podcast. Like, you know, we're Grateful Dead fans. You know, and obviously there's a lot of other people happening in San Francisco that, you know, there's a lot else happening. And then also his many years in New York, he's sort of like tangentially involved with a lot of things that you know, maybe, you know, the movie is not interested in like placing him with celebrities unless it's relevant to the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's not the story they're telling, which is sort of admirable because they could have tried to find out if he was at, you know, whatever, one of the notable Grateful Dead shows, or hanging out with Ken Kesey or whatever. I don't know, you know, whatever it may be. Seems like that probably
his biases are showing here. Your bias is really showing here. Wondering about Dead shows. I mean, I just, you know, as a journalist myself, and you can find that on Wikipedia. I'm a journalist on Wikipedia. If you go to the national first 2 pages of Frankenstein, I'm called a journalist. I got to call you guys out on your bias here. So just saying, just again, I got nothing else. That's all I gotta say.
Well, I mean, it's not just the Dead that would be interesting to know, but like, you know, he's in San Francisco. Like,
was he hanging out with Sly Stone? I'd like to know that too.
Sly Stone, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
there's a lot
Steve
happening.
Miller.
Steve Miller, Huey Lewis,
celebrity.
Yeah. Was Huey? Why did they avoid Huey Lewis? Okay. Let's get into it.
I was like, well, we do know of a celebrity that he meets early on in his days in San Francisco, and that is the poet and author and just general Renaissance man, I guess, of Allen Ginsberg. He meets him very early on into his tenure in San Francisco, as of course he joins a commune, and it's not really like they don't discuss it in depth, like what the commune was exactly, but it's just like Yeah, it was, it was a time period. He was a hippie. He joined a commune, and he made music with Allen Ginsberg, and maybe dated him at one point as his which
Well,
I will say, if there is anything in this documentary that maybe I would give some shit for, and I think it's just because of the time period. Now that we're a couple years removed, hearing Allen Ginsberg talk about Arthur Russell, a teenaged Arthur Russell when he's like in his 40s or like his 40s or late 30s, it's like, I don't know about this one. I don't know. This is especially a comment that's made later on in the movie is also like, I don't know, but
yeah,
still.
Listen,
yeah.
If you're implying that
they certainly tiptoe around what may have happened there.
Yeah.
If you're implying that Allen Ginsberg was a little on the thirsty side, I think maybe that's a matter of public record. So I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, the movie's not interested in interrogating an issue of a power dynamic or, an age gap discourse type situation. It's, I think we can allow that it was 1967 in San Francisco. And, there was a lot of stuff going on and there's no indication that
it also seems
that
like
there was a victimization happening. So
it also seems like the people around Arthur at this point didn't like even the very free-spirited people who he was friends with didn't necessarily think that this commune was the most serious thing or the best thing for him. There seemed like to be a general dismissiveness to the guru, the self-appointed guru who was running the show in this Buddhist commune.
Yeah, Ginsberg says he was under the auspices of a Mongolian Buddhist guru, which is just like, I love that. I've never heard that sentence, those words put together in that order.
It's a good record title. Under the auspices of
Mongolian
that
Buddhist
just doesn't
guru.
happen nowadays. That just can't happen nowadays because of woke, I guess.
Because of woke.
I don't know what the reason is. Woke.
The woke mind virus won't allow us to be under the
Buddhist
auspices
mind
of
virus.
Yeah.
God, imagine Trump just all of a sudden just being like very anti-Buddhist. He just gets on that like, oh, the Dalai Lama. Oh, he tried to. He did. Oh,
it's a shame what happened to Arthur. He got under the auspices of a Mongolian Buddhist guru.
He played
Only
the cello
in,
so good.
Anyway, but that music that the Mongolian Buddhist guru. First of all, that person's unnamed. But if you're listening to this and you're out there, you're still around. Come on, Rock Docs, and talk about it. We'll be happy to talk to you. We'd love to hear your side of the story. But anyway, in the process of that experience, he got into mantras, drones, another thing that kind of comes up from time to time in a lot of musicians from this era getting into drones. I do think that is a heavy influence that goes through all of his music, his sort of experimental music, his acoustic guitar stuff, his dance music. It's way drone heavy. And really, I don't know, man. I'm learning in my old age that I think I'm a drone guy. Not the kind of drones that are attacking New Jersey as we speak, but the drone. This is going to be such an outdated reference by the time the podcast comes out, let alone somebody will listen to it later. But anyway, no, I mean, essentially, if there's any musician where it's like when he was young or she was young, whatever, they got really into drones and that influenced their music, I'm usually going to like it. Like John Cale, drone guy. I don't know.
Speaking, I mean, there's a lot of overlap here with Arthur.
I'm sorry. I think I'm just a drone guy, and Arthur falls into the drone taxonomy. So that's the thing. Anyway,
I'm stoked for you about this these days.
Thank you.
Good time for your drone era.
Taylor Swift's drone era is just going to crush.
Yeah.
Hey, Taylor Swift, hit up Callie Malone right now. You guys do great work together.
Let's do it. All right. Anyway, let's go to New York.
Yes, well, and that's basically how it happens in this movie. It's like, all right, we've told the San Francisco part. We're in New York now. There's no real discussion of like him deciding to go. At least I don't think so. He's just kind of is in New York at a point.
Mm-hmm. And again, nailing kind of some timing here.
Yeah,
like you want to be an avant-garde musician. It's 1974, and you find yourself in like Lower Manhattan. You know what I mean? Down or like the Village, wherever he was, like. you can't say the guy did not have good timing. You know,
Yeah.
all those of you who are
Absolutely.
saying it, I'm
Not at all.
okay. All right. Stipulated. He had good timing.
Yeah.
All right. So now we get into basically he goes to the Modern Lovers last show. Is that
Yeah.
that's what we're
One
told?
of the last shows.
One of them.
Yeah, one of the last shows, and he just somehow just walks up to Ernie Brooks and becomes friends with him, basically. Which is again like this, like he seemed like a quiet dude, but yet he just had this ability to like somehow find the Allen Ginsbergs and like all these people and connect with them and have them become sort of obsessed with him or fall in love with him in a weird way.
Or just recognize his genius. Just be intrigued by somebody who was that smart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
There is sort of something that's like a recurring motif of these times, of like these happenstance introductions that like, you know, just seem like they couldn't be replicated these days. That like, how did these really smart people cross paths? I don't know. One person went to see their show and chatted them up after the show. Like it's
Right.
you know, it's not more complicated than that.
Well, I think the thing that's striking is just that, like, I don't know, like all these years later,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we hold these people in such high regard. And I've spent my whole, whatever, adult life hearing about the Modern Lovers or whatever, that it seems like such a big deal to me.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was like, you know,
Like they weren't very famous at all. They were totally approachable.
right. I've gone to shows that have probably the same number of people that were at that show, and the artist was of a similar level of fame, and they just went up and started talking to them after the show because
Right.
it was like, you know, there's like 6 people hanging around at the bar afterwards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so that's probably what it was like. That's what I have to assume.
Mhm.
But it's hard to take yourself out of the like, oh my God, the Modern Lovers, Jonathan Richman. These are like huge superstars in my head. I don't know.
Yeah.
And he says that Arthur played folky songs with sophisticated chords, meaning like he was singing these somewhat simple songs about childhood, but infused with a trained musical sensibility. I guess that's how I'm.
Ernie Banks
Sort of
describes it as a transcendence of beautiful pop.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Yeah,
good.
they-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ernie
'cause,
Banks is good at talking about Arthur Russell.
Yes, and Ernie, it definitely seems like one of the people that was very close to Arthur for pretty much like the entire time he's in New York. And one of the few people. I mean, there, of course, like many a rock doc, there is the period where it's like, hey, yeah, Arthur, he was kind of difficult, he was kind of this, and Ernie, is very straightforward. Like, yeah, like he's a genius, I love him. He's so annoying. He's so annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
But he's allowed to be annoying because you go back to when he played his songs for Ernie. It was just like, oh my God, like these songs are incredible. Like we're just on a very similar wavelength, and hearing like some of the early versions of these songs that would later go on to be on like the compilation records, Love Is Overtaking Me and Iowa Dream. It's so interesting to hear like the early versions of these songs before like. Because famously, as we'll learn throughout the documentary, that Arthur is just constantly tinkering with his songs. He really, aside from honestly, really maybe like 24, maybe 36 at most tracks you could say for him were like finished songs that he released into the world. Everything else was just a constant process in working on it. So hearing stuff this early on in his career is really, really fascinating.
And that to me is like kind of reflective of coming from a place of classical music, because
Yes.
a classical composer, as I understand it, like will like often have musical ideas or things they're thinking about, and then will work on that on and off sometimes for years and years and years. And I mean, of course, there's like plenty of, rock or pop singer-songwriters who spend years working on songs, like, or, come back to things. But you think more about, somebody writes a song, that's the song, there's some adjustments and it may evolve over time, but basically that's what it is. And then they write another song, as opposed to like, almost like these math equations or something that you're like coming back to over and over and over again and trying to get to the core of or perfect or whatever. And so he really did have that kind of approach.
Well, yeah. So like, this is around this time he hooks up with Philip Glass, and both Philip Glass and Ernie both talk about like he wouldn't finish anything. It was impossible to get him to finish something. And like when he was working in a world where he wasn't alone and you needed something to be delivered, he couldn't do it. He didn't want to do that, or he wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it sort of makes sense when you see after the fact that like he was happier just making his music that was basically for himself. It was almost like a compulsion to just get it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Philip Glass says, about all the people that are hanging around the downtown art and music scene at that time. He says about Arthur that he was one of the more eccentric of the community, which is like saying a lot.
Yeah, he like lived in the same building with Richard Hell, and he's like,
right. Everybody's like, "Wow, this guy's
Richard Hell's like, this guy's nuts."
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he was a pain in the ass. Like, not like nobody says anything bad about him in terms of like the way he acts towards other people. It's almost like more he had the ambition for his music to be heard, and to, in some sense, he wanted to become more popular a lot of times. And yet it's sort of a self-destructive thing in terms of his, his career. Like he couldn't finish stuff. He couldn't stick with one sort of popular trend or a thing. He couldn't stay with a group, a band, or a bunch of other musicians or artists. He just like was, just on his own internal trip. And it just didn't allow him to just be a person who could say like, I've packaged it together and here you go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean that seems to come through the whole movie, but yeah, Philip Glass talking about that was part of it. So yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of great quotes about him in the movie. Like Ginsberg says he wanted to write Buddhist bubblegum.
Buddhist bubblegum, I wrote down. It's great. It's like transcendence of beautiful pop. Like these, like everybody was constantly impressed by like, I've never heard anything quite like this. This is different set of sounds,
So Matty, you've like kind of dug into his stuff more. So like in terms of his stuff from the 70s, I'm not super familiar with that. And they talk about some of it, like the Flying Hearts, his various bands, but the stuff before he gets into like the disco era, like how much of that stuff is out there at this point?
I would say a good amount of it is out there. It's a lot of stuff. Pretty much almost all of Iowa Dream is all of the like folk songs that he was making before he pretty much like really got into the New York scene and really started diving more into the avant-garde world. So a lot of stuff on Iowa Dream, and there's some stuff on Love Is Overtaking Me that also kind of has that same spirit, but you can kind of hear the avant-garde like leaking through. But I mean, the real struggle with Arthur Russell is that so much of his music did not come out. So in even like the Tom Lee and Steve Knutson, who runs Audica Records, who is basically they exist just to put out these old Arthur Russell stuff. Even they have like trouble figuring out like when this music was recorded, because he just had tapes everywhere, and sometimes they were pretty detailed and like, hey, this is when this was recorded. And sometimes it was just like, here's tape, here's song name, and good luck. Like not meant to be released really, or like not in that state, at least according to Arthur. But of course, the funny thing is just like he had such high expectations for himself, and then when you hear these, you're just like, which I don't want to spoil a part of the documentary. It's just like, what's going on? Like these are perfect. These are perfect songs that you're making. Like it's perfect as it is. Why are you tinkering with this still? Like just put it out, and so many people wanted to put out his music, like he has this reputation of being this like very obscure figure, like died in poverty, all that stuff. Like nobody knew who he was. As you learn in this documentary, like, no, a lot of people knew who he was. Like very well-connected people knew who he was and wanted to put out his stuff. But he just, as we've just been mentioning, he just got in his own way and just could not deliver, what these people wanted. But like the stuff that these people had heard, either his live performances or demos and whatnot, it just was like they were willing to put up with the bullshit, just for like, hey, maybe he'll finish this one. Maybe I'll be the guy that puts out finished Arthur Russell material. Maybe he'll be the guy that that he trusts. But it's just that just wasn't the way that he worked. But you don't really hear. Also, I think the thing too with his work at this time, this is before he really starts discovering like pedals, and also he's still working with people at this point. Like it's not just all home recordings as we get later on in especially in the 80s. So it's primal, but like when you do hear like Buddhist bubblegum, I think it's definitely most apparent in the stuff that he was working on in the 70s for sure.
Yeah, and like if it's unclear by anybody who is listening to this episode and has not stopped to listen to Arthur Russell's music yet, like the music is obscenely catchy. It would fit in like any indie pop playlist you could want to hear. It makes a great deal of sense. It's not inaccessible. It doesn't make you work. It's there's a depth to it, absolutely, but it is catchy from the first note in basically almost all of this music.
If you're a fan of bedroom pop at all, and if you like never heard of Arthur Russell, you never heard his music, you're going to listen to some of that music and go, so many artists I love are just jacking his shit, like just stealing wholesale from Arthur. But like that's the beautiful thing of it is, as not to spoil later on, but it is still like incredible to hear his influence in so much of today's music, whether it's like totally intentional or just, hey, he was early to things that people are just doing now regularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of people that were doing, I mean, we're, jumping forward a little bit to the 80s and the stuff he's recording at home. Like, you've got this advent of basically home recording technology. And so whether it is Guided by Voices or Daniel Johnson or, there's a lot of different people.
They might be giants.
Yeah, they might be giants. Sure. A lot of people that we've discussed on the podcast are, they clearly did not all know of each other, at the same time. Yes. But, the technology allowed for this kind of thing to all of a sudden pop into existence. And so, it's maybe that having that context now in 2020, whatever, makes it more accessible than it would have seemed at the time. I don't know, but it is true. Somebody in the documentary just says like, no matter what he was doing, that gift for melody was always there. And that is true. It's like one of these people like Paul McCartney or whoever who could just like, melodies just seem to effortlessly come. And, he just has that thing. So I think, we should talk about Tom Lee, who's the other kind of main character in the documentary, and just another person where you're like, oh my God, this person is just like, seems so sweet and kind. And you know what I mean? Like, this is the kind of movie where like, it's just a lot of heroes. And, so Tom Lee basically is like a dude who just kind of like was living downtown, I guess. And, I don't know if they say what he did, but he just like had a regular office job. And, is that right? Or did I miss something?
I'm not sure at the time, but eventually he becomes, I think, at least during the period where he and Arthur start dating, he's like a silk screen. It's something with like silk screens.
Okay.
Let me double check.
Well, the point is that he was gainfully employed in some sense.
Yes.
Exactly. Which is more than you could say of Arthur. You never really hear about Arthur having a job. Arthur getting a getting a paycheck was not part of Arthur's scene as far as the movie can tell you. So
because the closest thing he has to a job is like he was the musical director of The Kitchen, which was essentially like to us nowadays would be like a DIY art space where musicians and artists would come in and do stuff just sort of like nonchalant, very like not announced in advance, just like, hey, this person's coming in, they're gonna do some stuff, and that's where Arthur kind of makes all of his early connections in the music world.
So Tom and him just kind of bump into each other a few times, and this just like romance blossoms. And it's not the movie basically talks about how like I guess Arthur didn't really come out, at least publicly, to whatever that means at the time, until he was in New York, and like our buddy Allen Ginsberg was just like, waiting. You know what I mean? Like
Oh my
waiting for
God,
this
the
to
fucking-
happen.
The fucking quote about like Ginsberg being like watching his journey, watching him go from straight to queer. It just it's
I
like,
know.
oh my God, this is the weirdest way you could have described like what is otherwise like a very like encouraging coming out story of this of this artist who comes from Iowa, very even at the time still kind of maybe like just things. The way that things were back in the day just were not that accepting to gay people, even with Arthur's parents being, generally very like open-minded compared to other people. And, seeing him come to the city and like really meet all these people and really open himself up, it is like really amazing to see. And then Ginsberg's like, oh man, I love watching them go from straight to queer. And it's just like, which listeners, let's make this clear. Allen Ginsberg was born in 1926. Arthur Russell, 1951. Again, I'm Allen Ginsberg. I know you've been dead for basically the entire time I've been alive. I'm canceling you right now, 27 years after your death.
Wow.
I'm doing that right now.
Harsh. Cancel culture is alive and well on Rock Docs.
Look, we only have, as of recording, we only have about, a month and a half left of, actually, not even a month and a half, less than a month and a half of woke, before our dear President Trump takes over. And,
so we got to get these cancellations in now. It's getting the cancellations in is like getting the pardons in. It's like you got like the last few weeks. It's the reverse. It's the reverse
save
pardon.
my skin. I just I'm just trying to save my skin. If being a grifter.
So for the record, Matty has canceled.
Sorry.
Finally, the long
Ginsberg
dead,
is out.
the long dead poet laureate of the American Underground has been canceled. So don't. If you're reading Hal, if your plan after this, listening to this, was to read Hal, don't do that. Is that you're out? You're just you're telling.
This is also like the third Ginsberg appearance in our podcast. I think.
Oh no, more than third. We had No Direction Home.
Rolling Thunder Review. Yeah.
He must have been in more. Oh, was he in the Velvet Underground one? No, I don't think so. Okay. Seems like he pops up more, but maybe I'm just imagining.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, there you go. Allen Ginsberg. All right, but we got Allen Ginsberg has a tendency to take things off track. But anyway, can we just get into Tom Lee?
Well,
yes.
Let's Tom's great. Well, so Tom, to skip to the end of it, Tom like lives in Iowa now. He's like,
well, yeah. That story is so sweet. I mean, what happens is just to kind of speed run through this because we're already going long on setting this up. He and Tom fall in love. Tom basically goes to work in the morning and Arthur stays home and creates music. And there's, we'll talk about the disco era and other things, but just to kind of set this up, and like Tom is with him through the rest of his life. So Tom reveals, and Tom just basically says like he was so happy to be able to support Arthur's music. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people would be like, I go to work and my partner stays home and
makes
dicks around and makes music that nobody will ever hear. Like that's a drag. Tom, the way he frames it, he was delighted to be able to do that. You know what I mean? He loved Arthur so much and loved and appreciated his music so much that it was like, it was like a privilege,
like a
for
gift.
Him to have the
it was a privilege for him to be able to do it. Yeah,
which is just wonderful. And just kind of going through the Tom story. Eventually, Arthur finds out that he's HIV positive. Tom is negative. Tom, is upset because he claims he thought they were monogamous. Not, I don't know. I don't know that we need to investigate that in great detail. But one way or the other, he stays by Arthur's side through his whole life. And the story that, oh my God, what's her name? Emily, Arthur's mom, tells of like how, first of all, somebody said to her, oh, it's so great that you're so supportive of your son because he's gay. And that's how she found out that he was gay, and then but then she calls him up and the first thing she says, because it's the 80s, is like, is this true? And then he says, yeah. And she says, have you been tested for AIDS? And he says, I haven't been tested. I don't want to be, I don't want to find out. It's like, boy, these people like are so open-hearted, but I don't know.
There's a series of really touching stories. There's one where as he's dying, the doctor asks how they want to proceed, and the parents basically look to his partner and say, well, obviously whatever he thinks, which, you know, at that time is like that. I mean, that's a pretty progressive thought to
1987.
Yeah.
Oh, 1992.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, 1990. But still, extremely, for a, World War II veteran era couple in Iowa.
To recognize, like, well, look, we haven't been with him in his days and nights.
This is his partner.
The sickness. This is his partner. It's decide. And then the tear wrenching story that his dad tells about used to tease him about being a bad sport when he was a little kid. Whenever he would whine about something, and then he combs his hair in bed, and he's tugging at his hair, and his hair is coming out because of the chemo. And he says, "You're a good sport, Arthur." And Arthur looks up at him and says, "Are you sure?" And those are the last words they ever spoke to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really touching stuff.
Which,
I mean, this.
I was
Sorry.
going to
Go ahead.
I was going to say to clarify, as as a part of his AIDS HIV diagnosis, he eventually develops throat cancer, and then not too long after that, also develops dementia, which just makes that story like even sadder somehow. That hey, not only dealing with HIV, but also dealing with cancer and then dementia. It's stuff like that where it's just it's so unfair sometimes who gets dementia and things of that sort. Someone as just deeply creative as Arthur Russell, like having those gifts, his gift of melody, his voice, and then his mind, just having that slowly be taken away is just, it's really fucking sad. It's really fucking sad.
Yeah. And I think the danger of or the challenge of talking about this part of the documentary in the show is that it makes it seem like this movie is a heavy pill, and you should watch it because it's good for you, but it's going to be a bummer and you're going to be sad and miserable. First of all, the movie has a very uplifting, it's not forced, I mean, it's a genuinely uplifting story epilogue, but also it's handled so well that it's not like I'm having a blast watching this part of the movie, but it's handled with the delicacy and the sensitivity that it doesn't feel like dun dun dun, here comes the melodrama. You know what I mean? It's just all part of the story, and there's sort of an organic nature to it. I'm not sure I could put it any better than that, but it doesn't, I just don't want somebody to listen to this and go well, I'm glad these guys watched it, but I would never want to watch that kind of thing, because it's not a drag. The whole movie, the movie as a whole, maybe if you stopped at that moment, you would be like, wow, this is a real downer. But there's just so much more to it than it, and it's not like I don't want to watch this movie again. You know what I mean?
One thing we haven't said: the entire movie is 70 minutes. It is, for a movie that's dealing with this subject matter, is breezy by comparison somehow.
Yeah.
It moves. It's funny. This last portion, I guess one way to describe it is they all have smiles on their face. All of these stories are being told by people who are smiling because they're remembering Arthur. His music is everywhere in the movie. I mean, there's so much of his music in the movie. So the totality of it is uplifting, and it's bright. It's a very bright movie.
Mm-hmm. And if we want to dip back a bit, in the runtime, I think one of my favorite segments of the movie is all the stuff about his very brief disco career, becoming
it's incredible.
a disco superstar producer for a very short period of time, but a very fruitful one. As again, I just because of course
Lola Love calling him the funkiest white boy I ever heard.
Oh my god, that was one of the first on my first watch. I think that was the first note, because I just wanted to watch the movie as is initially before I really dove deep and made some notes. That was one I'm like, I gotta write that down. I gotta make sure I have that in the notes. That strange little white boy. but Arthur, he eventually starts going to a disco club called The Loft, which is like a non-profit venue that's run by Diva Mancuso. I think like a really close comparison would probably be like the Hacienda in the UK, which was run by the Factory Records people. That's probably
and just to say this is like seems to be when the only people in the world who knew what disco was were like a tiny number of people in the gay community in New York. This is like before, John Travolta and the Bee Gees. This is like the early shit.
Actually, I actually might want to say it's actually in the post period where like disco becomes like deeply uncool. I want to say this because I think he starts putting out the disco stuff in like the early 80s. So this is like
okay. See, I misread that entirely. There you go. All right.
Yeah, this is after the disco demolition night. All this is like when disco becomes deeply uncool unless you are a gay person in New York City. That is the only place where disco is
that
cool
makes
still.
Sense. All right, proceed.
Well, it is. I mean, it is interesting. Yeah, go ahead. So go ahead, Matty.
I was gonna say he strikes up a friendship at the Loft with maybe my favorite person that's interviewed in the movie, Will Sokolov, who is just this again. This New York. This man is New York embodied. A specific time period in New York. Like that is Will Sokolov. But friends with the Loft, they're just chatting up, talking music, and I believe he's like an entrepreneur, and he's like, hey, we should start a label. And Will and Arthur start this label called Sleeping Bag Records because Will had a tendency, did not have a bed. He just slept in sleeping bags because he's just like, I put like a bed and having to make it and all that. No, I keep it simple. I just give me a sleeping bag and that's all I need. It's all good. They start this label and start putting out music together that Arthur makes, most notably under the name of Dinosaur L, which if you like Remain in Light by Talking Heads, you're gonna fucking love the Dinosaur L stuff. That's
exactly what it sounds like to me. Yeah.
It's got the African rhythms and all that influence, but mixed into like disco, and it sounds so fucking good. And despite being at the time like the most popular stuff that Arthur ever made, nowadays it feels like some of the most underrated stuff he's ever put out. Where it's like, it really just shows like, hey, this guy does contain multitudes. Like he really could do a lot of stuff really, really well. And obviously leads into the great Lola Love quote where she was touring with James Brown and occasionally hopping on some random disco stuff, and then the track gets played for her before her vocals are laid down, and she's like, who the fuck made this? Like, who made this? And then they go like, oh yeah, it's Arthur Russell. And she's like, that white boy, the strange little white boy, like that's the guy who made this. And they're like, yeah. And so hops on the track, does Go Bang, which again has some incredible vocals on that. And
she talks about how he coached her.
How he coaches her lyrics.
Vocals like be crazier and crazier and crazier. Yeah. Which is just,
and that's like a great piece of filmmaking there, where she's describing him coaching her, and they're playing the song as it finished out over top of it, and you can hear it. And it's like, this is crazy stuff. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Again, a skillful piece of filmmaking, and that's the kind of thing that we love in a music documentary. Is like, somebody who's a musician who participated in something, like finding a way, and then the filmmakers finding a way to get you into it, where maybe you had heard it before, but you never really paid attention or something. But all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what's happening. That's how this came together. That's what makes this special or interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they also, there's throughout the movie, they like, you mentioned when he's in San Francisco and he starts to flirt with drones for the first time, but they talk throughout.
Drones, that's my thing, right?
Yeah, David.
Yeah, okay, you got my attention now.
Drones. But like that, he liked to make music with like a blender going. He liked like the background noise, like the white noise of a blender or something. He liked to write that way, and he used to run. He used to like listen to his Walkman and run down by the water, and it would like lent itself to this like driving beat that was present in his music. They, there's like multiple different times where they sort of find a way to have people who are close to him explain some of his non-musical influences, basically.
Yeah. So again, he sort of like goes through this disco phase.
Yes.
and then he just
He
moves on
becomes
to other stuff.
Well, he becomes paranoid that like people are stealing from him. He starts
Yeah.
thinking everyone's stealing from him.
It's the paranoia, and where I think the problems where people realize like, oh, this guy can't, like, either he can't finish stuff, or like he's so critical of his own works. As I believe it's Go Bang, they finish a track, they put it on like on wax, like whatever, the equivalent of like a very like shitty test pressing is, immediately send it to the loft. DJ goes, all right, whatever I'm playing next, I'm playing this now instead. Plays it, dance floor goes off, Sokolov's happy, like he's like, hey, we made a great track here. And then Arthur, he comes in, talks to him, being like, like, I immediately think of the fucking Tim Robinson sketch where he's like, I'm ruined. The track was horrible. The drums, oh my god.
He hated the drums. Right?
He's like, oh my god, the drums. And Sokolov's like, are you crazy?
Like in the club. He's like talking to him in the club. He's like, I can't believe the drums sounded like that.
What have you done to me? And then like Sokolov's like, Arthur, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, look at these people. Like they went crazy for the track. Like what is going on? And it goes back to what I'm saying, where like you listen to his music now, like the stuff that's come out through the Audica compilations, and you're just like, what? Like, and as someone that is also very deeply critical of my own works, even I'm like, dude, like, what are you not hearing that I'm hearing here? Like, what is going on? And those Dinosaur L tracks are like perfect examples. And it's funny that's probably the only time he's able to like consistently release music, is because of really the instant gratification he gets, and really Sokolov being like one of the only people to really like dig into him hard, being like, dude, like the tracks are incredible, the dance floor is going off, what's going on? But even then, eventually that perfectionist streak just continues to really keep up with Arthur, and even Sokolov can't get him to put out music. It's like, all right, dude.
Well, as this kind of paranoid streak develops, he apparently claimed that the Rolling Stones were ripping him off. And I will say,
love it.
The list of people who the Rolling Stones ripped off is a very long list.
Yes.
As we know, we can spend all day litigating that list. I don't know that I've ever heard Arthur Russell being one of the people on that list, but maybe somehow Emotional Rescue or that kind of thing. Like somehow, like, I don't know, it could be.
It's a very low chance.
I don't know.
It's a non-zero chance. We'll just say that. But it's probably a non-zero chance knowing the record of the Rolling Stones. Like, hey, Keith Richards could have been up in the club and could have heard Dinosaur L, or could have been at the kitchen hearing.
It's not impossible that things filtered back, or Mick was at Studio 54 and somehow there was some crossover. It's not impossible that the Rolling Stones ripped him off. Let's just say. I'm not going to be a character witness for the Rolling Stones here, but
I'm not arguing with Arthur.
It's also like, well, if you're Arthur Russell at that era and the Rolling Stones are kind of pumping up your style, another person might see that as a career opportunity. Hey, great. I can capitalize on this momentum that we're getting here. Not him. He needed a marketing manager. He needed a McKinsey consultant to come in and slap him around a little bit.
Oh God.
If only.
Just hearing
if only somebody had introduced Buttigieg to.
Did I just break your heart?
Yeah. You did a little bit. Right. It broke my heart a little bit hearing McKinsey consulting Arthur Russell.
And Arthur Russell.
Oh, God.
Well, so Matty, before we sign off here, I do want to hear your perspective on sort of how Arthur Russell's sound has obviously his recordings are finding an audience now. They're being released. That it's easy to listen to if you want to, and people should. But like in the decades that followed him, where do you see his either music going in the direction that he already was, or people being influenced by him? Where do you see the Arthur Russell sound emerging in the indie world?
Yeah, so I guess I could approach this a couple ways. I could also, I first kind of want to approach it from what happens if he survives, like if he gets to this ordeal and he continues making music, even just like a little bit longer, like not even, up until maybe like the late 90s or the early 2000s, let's say. Pro Tools would have been, oh my God, I'm imagining Arthur Russell using Pro Tools. I'm just like, oh my God, if we're talking about him never releasing shit, Jesus Christ, he'd be tinkering forever with Pro Tools. But, you know, for me, you know, he was just so innovative in terms of home recording. Like, I think really the some of the biggest examples I think of is a lot of the early Bandcamp stuff that was popping up. You know, I'm thinking like Car Seat Headrest or Freaking Cosmos, like these artists that were just relentlessly recording stuff at home and just putting it up on Bandcamp, and that led to them becoming extremely popular in the indie world and signing, you know, label deals with like Matador and Sub Pop, you know, and really just the prolificness, and that's really one of the biggest things. And also especially when you get to like the World of Echo stuff, the more kind of avant-garde like delay and effects pedos, like you hear that and you know, it's not too, you know, it's easy to draw a line between that and what would go on to become like dream pop and shoegaze, and hearing him kind of tackle these sounds in a way that even those artists didn't tackle it that way. It's sort of like almost like an alternative dimension of like, hey, like what if instead of guitars, dream pop was originally originated from like the cello, you know? So that stuff immediately comes to mind of, you know, obviously we get dream pop shoegaze, and there's so much stuff that sprouts off from those movements, and wondering like if World of Echo took off, like how would that have affected like the American indie and alternative scene? Like what if REM had heard World of Echo and we're like, well, we're changing everything we do now as a band. So there's that stuff. And I also think of the way that his music has been released as a big name in the news right now as we're recording this is once again another Juice WRLD posthumous album has been released into the world, and seeing the way that Tom Lee and Steve Knudsen, who runs Audica Records, seeing the way they've handled his estate and the way they've handled releasing his music is really inspirational. They really do take their time and really think about how they're going to put this music out into the world, and really making sure that there is a cohesiveness and in trying their best to keep the music as it was. I don't hear any stories about them using AI to like complete the works, or, you know, using whatever new technology to enhance it. It's just like they're trying to keep it to whatever Arthur's vision was of the song when that tape was recorded. That's the way they do it, and it's really inspirational, and just makes you even more mad when you look at like obviously Juice WRLD, as I mentioned, or like the way that the estates of like XXXTentacion or Pop Smoke have handled the release of music posthumously, and being like, man, there's a better way to do it. You could do it like this and really, you know, take your time, because that's the thing is that like it's, you know, 2024 as we're recording this. There was a great compilation that came out last year called Picture of Bunny Rabbit that is one of my favorite things that I've heard from Arthur Russell, and that stuff that's pulled from the World of Echo sessions, which, you know, if you are handling an estate like Arthur Russell's, and you hear one of the first things you hear as you're digging through all these tapes is stuff from World of Echo, his only like proper studio album, you're immediately like, well, we got to release that. Like it's World of Echo. You're immediately wanting to cash in. But Steve and Tom love his music so much, and they're like they don't want to feel like they're cashing in on his legacy. They really take their time with the stuff, to the fact that like, hey, that just got released, and the fact that there might be even more stuff in the archives that we haven't heard. That I believe in an interview with Pitchfork, Steve indicated that this is probably the last thing we'll get for a really long time, or at least like the last compilation of this sort. We maybe get like Lucy's and stuff from here, but just knowing this, like this project was just the care that this, you know, that they've taken with Arthur's music and his legacy is really inspirational, and really is like that is the standard bearer of how you do, you know, how do you release music posthumously? That's the model that you need to follow.
It's been like a 20-some-year project, which is like pretty incredible. You know, and like longer than his career as a recording artist. Now, usually when we do these podcasts, we kind of just run through the whole documentary, but I kind of feel like in this case, there's like a 10-minute segment at the end of the movie. You guys know what I'm talking about. That is really moving and sweet. And I almost feel like we'll just kind of leave that for the viewer. You know what I mean? Like go on to Tubi, future sponsor of Rock Docs. The movie's 70 minutes long. You know what I mean? Like go check it out. I feel like we usually just don't really care about spoilers, but you know, it's a very sweet ending, and I think it's worth experiencing. So maybe we'll just, you know, we'll not get too much into that. I do want to say, to bring back a frequent guest of this particular conversation, that Tom does say that as Arthur was dying, our friend Allen Ginsberg would come and just, you know, sit with him. And so, you know,
can I sit with Arthur?
I'm going to be a character witness for Allen Ginsberg now. He's been canceled, but maybe we uncancel him. He sat with the guy as he was dying.
I will say, as the man that's trying to cancel him, it's actually a very sweet moment in the documentary. Like hearing that, because at the end of the day, like, you know, I do kid to some extent. It did seem like that Alan and Arthur were still very, very close, even to his dying days. So like seeing the support that he would show Arthur, even after, you know, like Arthur's still at this point relatively obscure figure. The fact that like he had that much of an impact on Ginsberg, it just goes to show like, hey, just even at this period of his life, still such a magnetic person that really a lot of people wanted to be around.
Absolutely. Andy, anything else we need to say about this film and this person and so forth?
I don't think so, except I really, you know, couldn't encourage people more strongly to go dive into this catalog. I'm really excited to be on the early edges of doing that myself, because it is rewarding and great immediately.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we'll talk about documentaries about, you know, super famous artists who are just going to get a million documentaries, just be one after the other. There's always going to be another Beatles or Bob Dylan or whatever documentary or film, whatever it may be. You know, Arthur Russell is not probably going to get a lot of full scale documentaries made about him. You know what I mean? Like it's just this is the one that's going to be probably. Mm-hmm. And when we come across one that is done so well and so loving, etc., you know, it just makes it like I'm happy that this is the one that it is. You know what I mean? Like if he was only going to get one, you know, full length film about him, they nailed it. You know, it's a great tribute. So you know, I don't know. Shout out to Matt Wolf. You nailed it, buddy. Yeah, it's a great documentary. Great guy. Great music. Can't say anything else. Matty, you want to put a pin on that, or you're just going to co-sign on that?
I mean, I just want to, you know, I think one of the last things that's said in this movie that really stuck with me is one of the final quotes that someone relays about something that Arthur told them that I think is just such a great way to describe this documentary and describe his music, is that his quote was, music can heal. Music is not just something to go dancing to. It can really heal. And like, that is a philosophy that, you know, that it's just like, oh, that's my philosophy about music. Like, wow, that he just said it. Like, that's just the way that I feel about music. It's not just something to go dancing to, or it's just been such a healing factor and such an important thing in my like entire life, really. And just hearing him say that, it's just like, wow, okay, well, no wonder I find such solace in his music.
Yeah, and any sentimentality like in the movie is completely earned, which is such a rare thing. So, yeah, man, Matty, thank you. Not just for, you know, bugging us on Blue Sky, but, you know, for suggesting this movie, for coming on, and for introducing Andy to...
turning me on to
Andy doesn't... He doesn't like Fish now. Now he likes Arthur Russell. You've really changed his whole life.
I mean,
my wife, thank you too.
Mission accomplished.
I'm always happy to introduce people to Arthur Russell. He's a very, very important artist to me, and I'm very glad that his music is connected with you.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks to Treble again for being our pals. Check them out, treblezine.com, and thank you for listening to Rock Docs.
So many people say, oh, Arthur was strange, or he was so into his work that people didn't know what to make of him. But yet, for me, I was totally enthralled by that.
Arthur was beginning to release strange dance records in the disco era.
It was a hippie drug scene.
We thought the worst, of course.
Arthur, in a way, was not tied to any of these styles. Arthur was tied to Arthur.
To see him go in and make some great music, and then it's sort of like floating away, would get us into conflict.
So he went from being a guy who was like spaced out naturally, and then spaced out all the time because he was stoned all the time, and then spaced out because he was a genius, and then he became demented, spaced out.
He said to me, Will, music is not just something you go dancing to. It can really heal.
I mean, from my point of view, he's one of the best songwriters ever. You know, he's as good as the Beatles. He's as good as anybody.
He made some really remarkable, very individual music, which was, I guess, too remarkable and too individual for its time.
Combination